the Titans story, because either it's going to be a good story, like a heroic story, something miraculous, or it's going to be bad, right? I just knew that going in. I didn't want to feel bad. It's sort of like when you go to see a movie and there's a bad spot in a movie that is like horrible, just, you know, something tragic. That's when I turn it off. That's when I go away. That's when I say, I should have picked a comedy like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles or something. I mean, that's the way I am now. And so for a news story like that, I said, I'll keep one eye on it. They're searching. That's good. They're searching. That's good. Here we are on day 4 and they're still searching. And I'm thinking, because they said they were going to run out of air in 72 hours. And then here we are. This was the day of reckoning. And they discovered that the debris field. So that's kind of the news story of the day. Everyone's covering it. Finally, everyone's covering it. It's not a happy ending. 5 people are lost, and we'll get into that. But it does put a little somber note. Actually, this is supposed to be a somber show. Well, it's not supposed to be, but the way I've set it up, I'm talking about Vincent Chin, day 4. You start with Vincent Chin, June 19th, 1982. Really talking about Vincent Chin plus 41, right? 41 years after the most famous Asian American hate crime. And I mean, no one talks about any other Asian American hate crime which has the same kind of consequence in terms of what it did to an Asian American community. So I know most people like to celebrate round number holidays, but I take it upon myself to talk about it each year and to go over the 4 days from June 19th, the day that the beating of Vincent Chin at the hands of Ronald Liebens took place, and that parking lot in McDonald's, Highland Park, Michigan. So you take the 19th, the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd. This would be the 4th day. Vincent Chin was in a coma. And then the 23rd. And we just do a moment toward a little later in the show where we talk about the case, talk about the things that I've written about it, how I've evolved, or how, as I reported on the story, the things I've written and the new things that came out when I wrote those stories, and then where we are now. It's a kind of meditation, but a way of really trying to dwell on this story that doesn't have a happy end. I mean, Vincent Chin is still dead, and the estate is still waiting for some kind of payment from Ronald Liebens, who was told that there was a $2 million debt that was assigned, and he's used bankruptcy laws to avoid it. So we'll talk about that a little later. Throughout the years, you can look back and say, what was happening in 1982? I mean, that's a significant thing. How things have changed since 82, and how things have not, and how people still to this day say, Vincent who? I mean, they were saying that closer to 1982, certainly. The documentaries that came out, the 2 of them that really almost was like still news to a great number of people who just missed the story. Of course, there was a large group of Asian Americans of a certain age who they awoke. They became more socially conscious, more socially aware. And that's just part of the story, the evolution of our community and of the United States. Something to think about. We'll talk about that a little later on in this program. Also, Modi, right? Prime Minister Modi's here. The state dinner is tonight. I thought it was yesterday, but the press conference was today. Interesting press conference. And as I said, the reason why we cover Modi and have to pay attention to him is because there are 4 million Indian Americans here. And as is the case with a lot of AAPI, I know this being Filipino American, coming from immigrant communities, 60% of the Asian American community, primarily immigrant. There's still more than just a corner of the eye that pays attention to homeland politics. I know this from just working in the Philippine media. Certainly, this is the truth with China watchers, and no less true with India watchers. In fact, the papers that I know of in the Indian American ethnic media, just like all the other Asian ethnic media sources, big attention to what's going on back, quote unquote, home, even though by rights, I mean, many people are perhaps dual citizens, but some have become totally American. And they're still looking because they have relatives. This is the way it is in the AAPI community. And I was talking to a friend, Jim Paymar, by the way, who has a podcast out called The Big Shift. He talked to me about being a Filipino American. And he actually used it as a topic for his podcast. The latest Big Shift with Jim Paymar. You can catch it on Spotify and other outlets where you get your podcasts. But he was just astonished to find out that there were 4 million Filipino Americans and that they were in the top 4 immigrants or peoples from foreign countries here in America. It's Mexico, China, India, and the Philippines. And I said, yeah, and it used to be the Philippines was right up there, right after China, and even above Mexico because of the relationship that the United States had with the Philippines, that being the colonizer, that being big white father, right, to the Filipinos. And I don't know what happened, but we lost our stature. India took over. And now here is Biden talking to Modi like Modi is best friend, Mr. Democracy. And that's not, it's only half right. I mean, Modi he knows how to be the populist, but the populist who is also the iron hand. He's an authoritarian when he has to be. And the question was brought up at the press conference today. What about, what you've done to, for issues of free speech in India and for the religious minorities? And what kind of democracy are you? It was phrased much more diplomatically, of course. But there was Modi saying, hey, just like President Biden says, the reason why India and the U.S. are friends is because democracy is in our DNA. I'm paraphrasing, but he did use DNA because Biden used the term DNA. It's in our DNA. And this is the great theme, right? Modi's here, and it kind of emboldens Biden to embrace his Democratic brother. I I don't want to say democratic, his brother in democracy. That sounds better because in a democratic brother sounds like, like he's side by side with Kamala Harris or something, who in fact was named by Biden in one of the speeches that Biden gave this morning, saying, hey, look, we got the vice president. Her mother came here when she was 19. It talked about her mother as this cancer researcher. She was at UC Berkeley. And then talked about the 4 million Indian Americans. I'm telling you, what puts us, AAPI, on everyone's awareness list is the global reality that our ancestral homes are a large part of this modern equation of how the new world is going to look like, how the modern world is going to look like when you talk about climate change, big issue at the press conference. It's funny to hear Modi sound like he's Mr. Green when historically, India is one of the biggest polluters in the world. But there they were talking green, Biden and Modi, as well as talking, pro-democracy. The question that really got me was when a reporter asked about, how Modi was treating religious minorities, and asked him about human rights violations, etc. And Modi just said, "Look, there is no discrimination in my country. You look at India. There's no discrimination. Yeah, no discrimination." I don't have the direct quote, but there was a question. It was like, it made it sound like we're the perfect democracy. So it was a little bit of PR on the part of Modi because they're booming. India's booming. And for Biden needs to make sure that he's on the right side with India, because they can help, or it can help, as the United States deals with China, as the United States deals with Russia, with the big global powers. And then just in terms of Asia, where Asia is, it's the population, certainly. But you've got China and India up against each other on the Himalayan border. And, it poses a real diplomatic, it's a different diplomatic dance now than it's been in the past. And certainly Modi knows how to play the diplomatic violin strings here in America. One of the first things he said was, hey, those 4 million Indian Americans who are here to greet me in Washington. He's not missing the beat when it comes to Asian Americans here in the U.S., including the South Asians, or including Indian Americans. So just kind of an interesting diplomatic dance on display throughout the day as Modi comes to town. Interesting piece in the New York Times talking about how Modi uses the airwaves in India to really solidify that sense of, hey, I'm Mr. Populist. I'm here. I'm Mr. Modi. And it works. It helps him retain the kind of popularity needed when you also show a propensity to levy that iron fist. Authoritarian, Modi, sometimes the shoe fits. There, I've mixed metaphors several times there. But it's true. I mean, this is the problem with Modi. But you look in at the history of the United States and Asian strongmen. How was it with Ferdinand Marcos? In fact, when the press used to call Marcos a dictator, you didn't hear Reagan or Bush. You never heard them call Marcos a dictator. In fact, almost laughingly, you recall when George Bush praised Ferdinand Marcos for his adherence to democratic values. Look that up. There's a Google reference there, which people who followed Marcos and what he's done or what he did would say, oh my God, people would see through all this. Now, this is what this whole dance with Modi reminds me of. Because one of the other questions that the press, in particular, this one Wall Street Journal Indian American reporter, asked Biden a follow-up on the story about calling President Xi of China a dictator. Because like I said, it's one thing when the press calls a foreign leader a dictator. It's quite another when the president, the leader of the free world, calls President Xi of China a dictator, as he did at a fundraiser in California on Tuesday. It was just comical to hear Joe Biden say, in answer to the question, is how does this impact, what Secretary of State Blinken was doing earlier this week to try to smooth over any ill will between the two countries. The question was, does it have any impact? Biden said no. And then Biden said something to the effect, it's hard to paraphrase Biden because you think when you hear Biden say his answer, he's actually paraphrasing what he should be saying diplomatically. So when I paraphrase the paraphrase, that's when but essentially Biden said, hey, I'm not going to, so I'm trying to paraphrase exactly what he said, but he was essentially saying, I can say whatever I want. It's not going to affect anything. And then he said, I support Blinken and what he did, of course. On to the next question. So it was kind of comical this morning to watch Biden and Modi, and tonight they're going to have the state dinner. So I wonder if curry is on the menu. What will be on the? Usually they release what's going to be on the menu. I haven't seen it yet. Big state dinner for Modi, and but here's one thing I want to share with you, because Biden's doing all these. They're not contortions, but Biden talks tough when he has to talk tough, and then he doesn't when when he has other objectives in mind. But this was an opinion piece written in the Washington Post by Barka Dut, who's a broadcast journalist. She says the title, "Sorry America, India will never be your ally." Because this is a kind of a butt-sucking move on the part of Biden to sort of like to prop up Modi after Modi in 2005 his visa was denied because of some strong-handed tactics in Gujarat 2005. People change, Emil. People change. So, but this is what Barka Dut wrote. She says, Narendra Modi, once denied a U.S. visa, is now poised to be a showstopper at the White House. The Biden administration is sparing no effort as it prepares to welcome the prime minister at a state dinner, only the third under the current president. As Modi gets set to address Congress for a second time, it might look as if India is pivoting to the US. But don't be naive, my dear American friends. India will never be your ally. I think that's fairly important to understand. And this won't change whether Modi or one of his rivals wins next year's election. India's collective memory of the indignities of colonization creates wide public support for an independent path. India's policy of non-alignment began with a refusal to be entangled in the Cold War. Today, this has morphed into aggressive multilateralism. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar says India should benefit from, quote, as many ties as possible. So if you're expecting monogamy, prepare to be disappointed. India has reserved the right to flirt with Russia, Iran, and even China if its national interests dictate such a need. And, this is the kind of blunt truth that you don't see the American analysts coming out to say. They just say, hey, look, Modi's an authoritarian. Modi has done this. He's not a true believer in democracy. Yeah, he's a believer in democracy as long as it benefits him too. And what this Bakra Dut, in her opinion, is saying, yeah, India has such a bad taste about colonization that they're going to be friends with everybody. Even Russia. They didn't even mention Ukraine and Russia today because that's another sore point. Because U.S., because India, they don't take a stand. New Delhi refuses to toe the American line on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Why? India's import of cheap Russian oil. So I think this is what you have to be aware of, that the different audiences of the different messages that go out there. And of course, the one message that Asian Americans should take away is how many times Modi pandered to the 4 million Indian Americans here. Prop them up. You're important. Biden, same thing. Propped up the Indian Americans. There are more Indian Americans serving in Congress now. So, yeah, Modi may be a bad guy in general, but he's being feted tonight at the state dinner. And what do you know? Not only is Modi's stock going up, but Indian American stock is going up. Meanwhile, the Chinese who are pro-Taiwan and maybe scratching their heads when they hear Blinken say, well, we're still with the one China idea. We're not for provocation. And their hearts sink a little bit. But when they hear Biden in California call President Xi a dictator, well, that should lift their spirits. Okay, yeah, we're on the right side. So this is the delicate dance we're seeing. Modi. I wonder, are they going to serve, is curry on the menu tonight? Look for it. I'm in a play where there's Indian Americans are in the play. And there was a food reference. And the reference was about garlic in Indian food. And I said, garlic in Indian food? I think garlic's a lot in Filipino food. Wouldn't this be better if you say curry? And the playwright, the esteemed Ishmael Reed, said, that's not a bad suggestion. That's in the play, The Conductor, which is having another extended run in the summertime in New York City at Theater for the New City. on First Avenue, and I'll be there to reprise my small role, emphasis on small. But I get to say Curry. I get to say Curry now. The playwright told me, stick that line back in. All right, a couple other things. Now this is Americans are pushing 40. The median age in the U.S. hit a record high last year, rising to 38.9 years. And it's likely only going up from here, according to the census out today. That means that the baby boomers and their kids, the millennials or echo boomers, are aging the country. And here's why Axios says why it matters. Decades of lower birth rates and increasingly, until recently, life expectancy means older folks make up an even larger share of the population, which has all sorts of implications for the economy. It means maybe a tighter job market. The aging workforce could drive worker shortages for years to come, especially in healthcare, which will become even more crucial as we gray. So there could be a shortage of doctors. Everyone's getting older. 38.9 years is the median age, which is actually a good sign because it means that the youth movement that you see in the media may go away. I mean, because who has the money? It's the boomers and the millennials, the aging folks. So the prime demographic target, 35 to 64, 35 to 54, not 18 to 24. The youth market, maybe Korea, South Korea. Maybe that's why they have the boy bands. I don't know. But it says something about America aging. Where are we going with this? Well, it means that if you remember Vincent Chin, you're a boomer. We'll sort of segue into our Vincent Chin saga. This would be the fourth day. You count the 19th, June 19th, 1982, the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd. This would be the fourth day. Vincent Chin was in a coma. June 19th, Highland Park, Michigan. You know, the facts of the case, a lot of people don't know the facts of the case. You mentioned Vincent Chin. People, they don't know the facts of the case. The facts of the case are this. June 19th, 1982, Chin was with his friends at his own bachelor party. He was just 27. He was mistaken for being Japanese by two white auto workers, Ronald Ebens and his stepson, Michael Nitz. They were at a Detroit strip club. Ebens told me when I interviewed him in 2012 that Chin sucker punched him. They took the fight outside, but then it broke up because he even said he was outnumbered, bad odds. And it would have ended there. But then Ebens and Nitz pursued Chin by car. They hunted him down. That means that no matter what Ebens has said subsequent, that it has nothing to do with race. He denies that he was thinking it was, Chin was Japanese. You pursue someone by car, and that person is an Asian American, and you're a white American, and you're angered out of proportion to why a white person should be angered by an Asian American. You can't tell me that race has nothing to do with it. Ebens and Nitz found Chin in that parking lot, and that's where Ebens beat Chin with a baseball bat. Facts of the case. Chin from the 19th to the 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd. He was comatose. On the 23rd, they took him off life support. Henry Ford Hospital. So here's the damning facts that most people don't understand, or they can't imagine. That Ebens and Nitz, Ebens, the man who swung the bat, and Nitz were allowed to plea bargain. They pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, were sentenced to 3 years probation, and fined $3,720. No prison time for the murderers of Vincent Chin. You got to let that sink in. That's part of the meditation. And it's not to be angry at that. I mean, you could, but we're just trying to understand. Ebens and Nitz were allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. A state court, Michigan, sentenced to 3 years probation and fined $3,720. So you can see how even the most apathetic Asian American, not just in the Michigan area, but around the country, could be incensed by this. The outrage in the community led to a federal civil rights prosecution against Ebens and Nitz. Ebens was found guilty on one charge and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He appealed to the Sixth Circuit. The second federal trial was moved to Detroit, or from Detroit to Cincinnati. And then Ebens was acquitted by a Cincinnati jury that found no racial motivation in the killing of Chin. Zero. And so Ebens was allowed to go free. Helen Zia was appointed the trustee of the Chin estate. She told me the Chin family was awarded a $2 million judgment in civil litigation against Ebens for the wrongful death of Chin, and continues to owe money to the estate. And who knows how much it has grown, the judgment. But Ebens has not paid a dime. She told me back 2017. When I asked her about it, when I asked Helen, she said, the guy did what he did. He's a killer. He got away with murder. But the things that need to be done on behalf of the community don't depend on him or his death. It will bring closure, but it doesn't mean hate crimes have ended. And you know what's happened subsequent. Hate crimes have not ended. Hate crimes have gone up. Hate crimes just during the pandemic, which is why every year it seems that we should maybe be over this. It's good to go over the case again, to go over what happened in court, good to go over the facts and consider or take stock where we are. What does it mean to be Asian American? There are people today who are Asian American who have come to the country. I mean, this happened to me the other day. I was in the post office and the person helping me behind the desk helped me send a package She asked me if I was Filipino. I said, yeah. She said, and she couldn't imagine, she was so young, she couldn't imagine an older Filipino guy like me. She thought I was like her, a young Filipino who, I said, when did you come to America? She said she'd come to America about 10 years ago. She asked me when I came to America. I said, I was born here. My father came in 1928. And we realized we were different generations of Asian American. I didn't ask her about Vincent Chin. I don't even know if she knows Vincent Chin or knows about Vincent. I hope she does. But the way history is being stymied and rewritten or just not told, or being how it's being forgotten, I don't know if she'll ever find out. I mean, unless she took an Asian American history class, I didn't ask her about that. But and as I've said, I talked to Helen, and Helen Zia, the trustee, she told me some things that I really didn't know. And she said, yeah, here's some things that people don't bring up about the case. Like, people don't know that Vincent Chin was adopted. I know she told me that years ago, but it just sort of faded from my memory. But imagine you were Vincent Chin's mother, Lily. Helen told me that she died feeling that if she hadn't adopted him, he'd be alive. And it was just one of the compounding tragedies of Chin's death, that his mother, his adopted mother, felt this way, that maybe if she hadn't chosen him, he'd still be alive. I think the thing that really gets me is how back in 82, 83, there were still people who did not see Asian Americans as part of this overall diversity of America. I mean, yeah, there were Asians, but were they aggrieved? Did they have a part in this idea that, in the civil rights struggle of America? I mean, as an Asian American who grew up in the 60s and 70s, I remember it's like, did we count? Did civil rights apply to us? And it surprised me when Helen told me that, yeah, there were some people at the Michigan ACLU and the Michigan National Lawyers Guild. They weren't thinking a civil rights investigation for Vincent Chin. Not at the state level, at the national level, yeah. But at the state level, they were saying Asian Americans aren't protected by the federal civil rights law. And activists in Michigan, Helen Zia, one of them, had to tell them, yeah, it's not a black-white paradigm anymore. So you talk about the importance of Vincent Chin. It really was an awakening all throughout the country. And I don't know if people really saw us in terms of, activists who are aggrieved, who have some kind of civil rights, grievances to be taken care of. Maybe people would bring up things like, yeah, there were riots in Chinatown, or there were Filipinos who were killed in the 1920s. there just wasn't a sense of, how about now, in the 70s and the 80s and the, well, if you could find people talking about us, if you can find people talking about Asian American anything, remember, Asian America doesn't really start to blossom until 1965 with the Immigration Act. When the Immigration Act lifted all those racist quotas, where you had no Chinese Americans, no Asians coming in from any place. Filipinos were the exception. There were a handful of Filipinos left because of the relationship Filipinos had, or the Philippines had, with the United States. Historical, being colonized. But it wasn't until that 65 Immigration Act that we began to see Asian Americans in large numbers. And that's one way to look at the Chin case then and the Chin case now. Then meaning 1982, because by 1982, we were just sort of coming into our own, but still subjected to a kind of xenophobia that we saw when Vincent Chin went to a bar, sat across from two auto workers, and they saw Vincent Chin as the cause of the downfall of the American car manufacturing industry. So we think about all these things when I talk about trying to do these moments of remembrance. It was really just to, not to relitigate, but to try to understand. And then by understanding and teaching new generations about where we are. I mean, how does Vincent Chin relate to the 6 Korean Americans who were shot in the Atlanta spa killings 2 years ago? I mean, that was a violent hate crime. And hate crimes are still in the offing. In one jurisdiction, they didn't allow for hate crimes, but Robert Long, the gunman, was convicted. Now it's up to Fulton County, and frankly, Fonnie Willis has her hands full. Because one of the defendants she's going after in a different case is one Donald Trump. But we should be hearing something about that, about the federal, or about hate crime charges there at some point. Even though Robert Long has already been convicted for 4 of the murders. And then there's the thought about Ebens. Ebens is still alive. Ebens has been able to live his life. I last talked to him on the phone, I believe 2014, maybe. I was trying to call him 2012. He picked up, we talked. I ran my story that you can find on ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I called him maybe twice more. And there was nothing to talk to him about. The only thing I wanted to know when I did get him on the phone is when was he going to pay his debt to the Vincent Chin estate? Something he's never done. I asked Helen Zia, who I hope isn't upset with me for having talked to Evans. Because Evans told me that he was sorry that it happened. He says he thinks about the death, the killing. His exact quote was, "Nobody feels good about somebody's life being taken, okay? You just never get over it. Anybody who hurt somebody else, if you're a human being, you're sorry, you know?" But I remember asking Helen about that. She said, "I stood next to this guy in court. I see his face over and over, read his words, and frankly, I don't see a shred of sincerity. He's really saying, I didn't even mean to kill. Why should I have to go through this?" And then she told me it would take more than you interviewing him to him saying, "I'm sorry, I killed him. Let's see how sorry he is," and set an example for future people who are thinking of killing a Muslim student in North Carolina or a man in Kansas. These killers who kill out of hatred and go to justify their killings, it takes more than saying, "I'm sorry." That was a conversation I had with Helen Zia about Ronald Ebens, the man who killed. He killed Vincent Chin. Never served time. Was allowed to plea bargain. Second-degree murder. And then given probation. And fined $3,720. State court in Michigan. So we think about all this. Like I said, this is part of my annual, the 5 days of Vincent Chin, starting on the 19th, June 19th. It should be helpful that it's Juneteenth, right? June 19th. Coincidental. I mean, the black slaves in Texas ultimately did get justice. Vincent Chin didn't. There's still hope, maybe, that Ronald Ebens will pay some of the award that was assessed in the civil case. But otherwise, there's no closure. Not really. Ebens has draped himself around the bankruptcy laws to shield himself. So we think about the case. The 19th, when Ebens struck Vincent Chin with a baseball bat, day one. The 20th, Chin in a coma. The 21st, Chin in a coma still. The 22nd, Chin in a coma, 4 days. And then the 5th day, the 23rd, tomorrow, Chin taken off life support, pronounced dead. So I do this every year because it's just a shame that with every year time passes, people forget. I remember when my friend Corky Lee died, or just before. He always wanted to do some kind of flash mob. Let's go down. Let's do a flash mob down in Vegas, or the suburb where Evans lives. And Corky's, he's into that. I mean, he did the whole thing with the golden spike, right? The picture. And Google Corky Lee, Emil Guillermo, and you can see that podcast I did with Corky. And I didn't say no. I just didn't know how to do this. Okay. I kept saying, yeah, let's figure out a time or date. We just never did. But he did Utah. He did the promontory point thing. He did that photograph. Anyway, this is what I do. 5 days thinking about Vincent Chin every year, because it gives some perspective about where we are with Asian America, what kind of Asian America we have now. And you can see with President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, Asian America is now very heavily Indian American. And therefore now in Congress, they're political, they're raising money, and even Modi has taken notice, as he said in his remarks. So that's got to please Indian Americans. They're on the map. It didn't help Filipino Americans with Marcos, though. And Chinese Americans, what happens in the homeland is problematic at times. Because ask any Chinese American scientist what an anti-China thing does. It brings on that kind of suspicion where everyone suddenly is seen as a spy. And all I have to say are the 3 words, Wen-Ho Lee. Google him, the scientist, wrongly accused of espionage, put in solitary confinement, released, apologized to. When the whole world goes xenophobic toward Asians, you got a case like that happens. That's part of the Vincent Chin story. I mean, it's, one of the things you have to consider. Because xenophobia was definitely a part. Why did Ron Liebens chase down Chin? I mean, that's in dispute. Ronald Liebens would say, no, it had nothing to do with race. It had a lot to do with race. All right, so tomorrow we'll be back with more Chin Thoughts. On day 5, final day, and then I said I was going to just end a little bit on the Titan, because it's the big story. No survivors. Hamish Harding, or Harding. We had a Pakistani businessman, Shahzada Dawood, his son Suleiman, Paul Henry Nargile, Stockton Rush. I saw some CBS reports. David Pogue was talking about how he had to sign a bunch of waivers when he went on the mission, down on this dive last year sometime. He said he signed the waiver. He was terrified, but he said he felt okay because they'd done it 20 times. And maybe that shouldn't have been a reassuring thing. Maybe that should have been a concerning thing. 20 times, maybe. It's so sad. And yet there are people who live for this. This is their raison d'etre, right? They're explorers, they're adventurers. But it comes with risk. And I wonder now what happens when lives are lost and there will be some liability. Let's see how ironclad those waivers are, because we haven't heard the last of this. You know it. You just know it's not over. That people will mourn. There will be some kind of sense of grace. And then people will look at the fine print and see what the waivers say. And then people will wonder, why were people allowed to do this without the appropriate safety nets? Unless you're an adventurer, that's your thing, right? So rest in peace, those lost in the Titan. Like I said, I didn't want to watch it all throughout from Sunday when the first reports came out, because I was hoping, praying, and then today when they found that area debris, catastrophic implosion, bits of it all over. Sad. All right, so I was going to talk about affirmative action. There's more mullings, because here's the thing about the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court comes out with their decision, I mean, it's going to be a big deal, right? It's going to affect everybody. It's going to affect not just college admissions. It's going to affect the workplace. It's going to affect how people view affirmative action, how they look at race. And so while we wait for the decision of the Supreme Court, and it looks like they're going to rule against the way Harvard chooses its admissions or its freshman class, we're getting all these other stories, interesting stories, but essentially just affirmative mullings. Like the one on the front page of the New York Times today. Inside the lives changed by affirmative action. College opened doors, but policy's legacy is complicated. Ain't that the truth, right? Even for Asian Americans, right? This article today concentrated mostly on blacks and Hispanics who aren't really part of the Harvard suit, but they are part of affirmative action. And the nut graph is kind of interesting. The expectation that the U.S. Supreme Court will soon end or limit race-conscious admissions has elicited an array of partisan reactions. Dismay from some liberals who say that would represent a step backward for the country. Hope from others that class-conscious admissions could make up for the loss while easing racial tensions. And relief from conservatives who believe that race-conscious admissions is unconstitutional. But for many of the Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans whose lives were shaped by affirmative action, this moment has prompted a more personal, got to go to the jump. Oh, they do that on purpose, huh? To get me to read the whole thing. Where is it? Okay. Here's the problem with the jump. Now you gotta go back. A more personal reckoning with its complicated legacy. In more than 24 interviews with the New York Times, those who went to elite schools where their race may or may not have given them an edge expressed a swirl of emotions. A few concluded that the downsides of race-conscious admissions outweighed the benefits. Some spoke of carrying an extra layer of imposter syndrome. Many more grieved the closing of a path that led to rewarding careers and the building of wealth. I'd have to say that that's kind of the nut graph, right? Affirmative action did change people's lives. They don't talk about Asians. I think there may be another piece just about Asians. But this was interesting because, you know, you don't, it's going to affect blacks, it's going to affect Latinos, Hispanics, when you can't use race, if that's the decision that the Supreme Court does. But, at Harvard, that the black and Latino numbers have always stayed kind of stable the last 10 years from when I've looked at charts. In fact, the only thing that has changed is Asian American numbers. They've gone up, and the white numbers, they've gone down. So did the Asians take black or Hispanic places, or did they take white spaces? And if they took white spaces, then what does it mean for the Asian white alliance that we're seeing? I think the Asian Americans who are used, and you know who you are, used by white conservatives to essentially now defeat affirmative action. What'll happen when the whites turn against you and say, we're losing space to Asians. That's not fair. I don't know what's going to happen with the Supreme Court, but the remedy for if Asian Americans were discriminated against, and if it means, okay, you can't use race consciousness or race-based affirmative action or race-based, you can't use race as a basis to admit. If they go by just scores, who will that hurt? If the Asian numbers go up 20 to 30%, or go up from, right now they're about 30% at Harvard. If they go up to 35 to 40%, who gets hurt by that? Not the blacks, not the Hispanics. I bet it's going to be the white number. The white number now is going to be, it's less than half. It's going to be maybe in the 30% range. And then what will happen? Another lawsuit. So let's see what happens. They said they were going to do the Supreme Court was going to come out with their decision by the summer recess, which is still another week to go. So this could be the weekend, or this could be the week, or it could be early next week, or late, just like the Supreme Court to dump the bad news on a Thursday or Friday and say, gone fishing. But we're going to see more of these kind of mulling stories, affirmative action stories come out because people don't know when it's coming out. And, but they know people want to hear about it, talk about it. The Wall Street Journal had a story on page 1 today about the H-bomb. When does one say the H-bomb? And the H-bomb is, when do you denote to someone, denote or detonate, that you went to Harvard? As close to the end as possible, I would say. Or, that if they mention it right off the bat, then they are grade A a-holes. Unless it's used in self-defense. I'll talk about that tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. It'll also be day 5 of our Chin Thoughts. And we'll see if curry was on the menu at the state dinner. All right, that's going to do it for us. I'm starting to watch the Giants again. They're actually the San Francisco Giants are good now. I can wear orange again without guilt. Or, the coincidence of orange. Oh, yeah, you Giants fan? Yeah. No, I grew up with the Giants, but they're trying to go for their 11th win. If I'm happy tomorrow, it's because they won number 11. 11 in a row with young nobodies. Okay, we end this now. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 o'clock Pacific. Some people like to go off into the deep waters. I just like to talk to nobody on the internet. Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific. This is Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. Things I found noteworthy, worth talking about. I share it with you. I mean, we just talk and try to make a point or two. There are no, I'm just trying to be lucid. Make a point. This is the micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAXs, Asian American X, fill in your ethnicity, or the ALLs, the rest of you. Because you don't have to be Asian to appreciate the stuff we talk about. But thank you for being here. Regular listeners know I like to meditate. It's what's kept me from going amok, truly amok. I mean, it's kept it a metaphor all these years. And the meditation is a metta meditation, loving kindness. It always reverts back to loving kindness. It starts with a few prayers, for lack of a phrase, sayings, chants. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal